There's nothing wrong with taking information from Russians.
There's nothing wrong with taking information.
Depends on where it came from.
It is now okay for political campaigns to work with material stolen by foreign adversaries?
Well, it depends on the stolen material. Was it all right for the New York Times and the Washington Post to print against the objections
You're putting
of the president?
The Pentagon Papers and Vladimir Putin on the same level of morality?
The theft. It's part of the public's right to know. But I guess the public didn't have a right to know how sneaky, how dishonest, and how dishonorable Hillary and the people around her were.
Yet another head-scratching defense from Trump's television lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, on the president's conduct. Back with me, Shawna Thomas of Vice News, Natasha Bertrand of Politico, and joining the discussion, Jason Johnson of The Root. I'll start with Jason. Matthew Miller, who was on the show earlier today, tweeted in response to what Rudy Giuliani, who is a former U.S. attorney, by the way, and a former mayor, said. Now, this is an invitation for the Russians to hack Trump's opponent again in 2020. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, Joy, and here's the thing. Rudy Giuliani, whenever he does this, like, My Cousin Vinny shtick, where he gets on TV and sort of just completely abuses the law to explain anything that Trump does, it's a reminder of the lawlessness of this administration. Remember, during this week, when we have the Mueller report, we again see Republicans blocking funding for election security in 2020. So Rudy Giuliani is sending a message to America. He's sending a message to Trump. He's sending a message to the base. We are a lawless administration. We will continue to encourage lawlessness. We will do whatever it is we can to cheat and allow cheating in the 2020 election. And if you Democrats are not willing to stand up for yourselves, we'll do it again.
And you know, to that very point, Natasha, according to the Mueller report, Russians sought back channels to Donald Trump through his business ties, part of a broad makeshift effort by the Kremlin to establish ties to Trump. Those efforts were channeled largely through people in the business world of both countries, especially after the election. They led to the conflation of diplomatic and financial interests that was a stark departure from the carefully calibrated context typically managed by an incoming administration to the United States. You've seen this president welcome the Russian ambassador and their top spy into the Oval Office without Americans present. You've seen him take phone calls with Vladimir Putin without note takers present. You've seen him take meetings with Vladimir Putin that were claimed not to happen, and then they happened, and no one found out until afterwards. He's expressed, as per the Mueller report, a desire to do things with Russia. He still has the same pecuniary business interests he did before. Is there an expectation that now that it has been cleared by William Barr as being perfectly fine and Donald Trump believes it's legal, what is the incentive for the campaign in 2020 not to simply seek a redo?
There's zero incentive, Joy, and I think that that's a really important point. I mean, I also don't understand how Rudy Giuliani can, on the one hand, say that there was no collusion, which, of course, is not what the Mueller report says, but on the other hand, say that it was perfectly acceptable for the Trump campaign to have been willing to accept this dirt from the Russians, because in the end, it was a quid pro quo, right? The Russians wanted Donald Trump elected for a reason, and if the campaign was going to help them disseminate this material that they stole from the Democrats, then that is, you know, pretty much the definition of collusion in order to sway the election. But look, I think one of the biggest unanswered questions from the Mueller report, something that he apparently did not want to go into because this may have more to do with the counterintelligence investigation, who really knows, is Donald Trump's financial history, is the question of who does the president owe money to? Who is he indebted to? And how is that affecting the decisions that he makes with regard to our foreign policy? And in keeping quiet about that very important national security issue, Mueller has effectively, again, kind of handed this either to the FBI or to Congress to further investigate, because if the president is still beholden or is still beholden to Russian interests as of 2020, then we're going to see a repeat, as you said. I mean, not just Russians, but, you know, the Saudis, for example, the Chinese. I mean, this is a very serious national security crisis that needs to be addressed one way or the other.
And Shawna Thomas, if there is essentially a smorgasbord open that more foreign countries can come in, attempt to use business ties to sway the president of the United States, and nothing's being done about that other than we know that there are 14 investigations still ongoing. We know that we only know what 2 of them are, and that Donald Trump is not necessarily out of the woods, and he and his folks are not necessarily out of the woods yet. But the question, I guess, goes back to William Barr. Is there any sense on Capitol Hill among Republicans or Democrats that William Barr will intervene to try to save Donald Trump from the other 14 investigations that could still have him in jeopardy?
I mean, I'm not sure Capitol Hill has quite gotten there yet. I know that there have been some congressmen who have said that basically the Attorney General can't be trusted anymore. But I also think William Barr knows that these other investigations are happening. He knows that there's an investigation in the Southern District of New York. There's still the Roger Stone issue in the District of Columbia. There are other things that we are not privy to yet. And I believe that as Attorney General, he is not going to step into those investigations and stop them from happening. They are continuing to go on. We know that they are looking into, Trump's the inaugural committee, Trump's inaugural committee. We know that people are still looking into Trump's businesses. We still don't know what Alan Weiselberg, who is the CFO of the Trump Organization, what exactly his role is and what the Southern District of New York talked to him about. And those things are still going on. So I think that means, in some ways, the Justice Department is doing what it's supposed to do. And only time will tell if he decides to step in and try to save the president. I think the one thing that we should all hope for, because part of what we learned from the Mueller report was that, in some ways, it was like the people around the president of the United States or the then candidate Trump couldn't really pull off what it seemed they kind of wanted to do. Hopefully what they've learned is they've learned a little bit about law, they learned a little bit about campaign finance law, that they actually take that report, see what the campaign stepped almost up to the line to, and actually try to figure out a way to not do that. Let's hope that we are not reading New York Times and Washington Post pieces about them doing the exact same thing again. I guess it used that Mueller report as a prescription to do better.
Well, the question, I guess, to you, Natasha, is there any chance of that? Because it does seem that William Barr, if you go back to the 1980s, has sort of rinse-repeat when it comes to the way that he steps in to protect Republican presidents. What incentive is there not for him not to intervene? He's already proven he will do Donald Trump's bidding on the Mueller report. Why wouldn't he just step in? Or Kellyanne Conway this morning was out on TV saying the investigators should be investigated, that he should launch a special counsel probe of the people who investigated Trump. Why shouldn't we expect him to just do that?
Well, Joy, he's already intervened. He's already intervened when he said, that spying happened in 2016 on the Trump campaign. He has essentially intervened in, the ongoing investigations by focusing people's attention on whether or not the FBI acted improperly by infiltrating the Trump campaign, which, of course, there's no evidence of. He has already kind of launched his parallel investigation to what the Inspector General is looking at into the FISA warrants, all of the things that happened in 2016 about the investigation itself rather than the outcome of the investigation. And so I think that what we're going to see moving forward over the next year and a half before the election is an effort by the Inspector General, by the Attorney General, to put the emphasis back on the FBI, back on the Justice Department, and relitigate what happened in 2016 that allowed this investigation to move forward, even though we now know it's been established by Mueller that the Russians attacked and that the Trump campaign welcomed it. And that is where the emphasis should really be. But for now, I think that Barr is going to do everything that he can to put the ball back in that court.
And meanwhile, Jason, because Republicans don't seem to have the same inhibition about using investigative resources in order to advance their political prospects, right? So if you have William Barr do, as we just heard Natasha say, and try to turn the ship of state toward focusing, put the eye of Sauron on the investigators, on the Democrats, maybe even Hillary Clinton, maybe revive that. I mean, he could theoretically do that as a campaign strategy. Meanwhile, here are the Democrats agonizing over whether or not the Mueller report is enough for them to proceed to impeachment. Here is Adam Schiff.
The obstruction of justice, in particular, in this case, is far worse than anything that Richard Nixon did. The break-in by the Russians of the democratic institutions, a foreign adversary, far more significant than the plumbers breaking into the Democratic headquarters. So, yes, I would say in every way this is more significant than Watergate.
If it's worse than Watergate, then why the hesitation? Why only 2 named Democratic 2020 contenders for impeachment?
Because they're cowards, Joy. And I want to be cowards and treasonous cowards. And I want to be clear about this. If you think that what Donald Trump did is a danger and a threat to democracy, then the Democratic Party is failing in their responsibility to put a check on this presidency. It's amazing how the mighty have fallen. A month and a half ago, we were saying Nancy Ben Pelosi, and she's the slayer of dragons. And now she's the head of a group of feckless Democrats who refuse to engage with the information that they wanted to see inside this report that says that we have a criminal empire masquerading operating as an administration. So I am disgusted and offended that they're taking all of this information and basically saying, it's too much trouble, it's too busy. This is what the base asked for. This is what the American Constitution demands. And if you have any interest in a fair and open election next year, you've got to hold this administration accountable. And none of them are committed to doing it.
Well, I said it before, and I'll say it again, and not just because it's Game of Thrones Sunday. The Democrats are not the Lannisters. They are the Starks.
Yep.
They go to Westeros and end up with their heads on pikes because they do not fight.
And they get stabbed.
Back.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's one Arya. You just need one. Right now, it seems like Elizabeth Warren. We'll see what happens. A girl has no more time. Shawna Thomas, Natasha Bertrand, thank you very much. Jason will be right back. And coming